Reid Mitenbuler, Bourbon Empire, The Past and Future of America's Whiskey. Welcome to the fascinating world of America's whiskey, bourbon. Dive into the engrossing book Bourbon Empire, The Past and Future of America's Whiskey by Reid Mitenbuler and discover the rich history and intriguing stories of this distinctive spirit. In this summary, you'll learn about the unique aspects and classification of bourbon whiskey, its connection to American history and culture, and the challenge it faced from vodka's rise in popularity. Get ready to uncover how the whiskey industry has shaped and adapted to changing times using marketing strategies, clever branding, and fierce competition to stay relevant and retain its charm.
The All-American Bourbon Whiskey. Bourbon's journey to being the beloved American spirit lies in its historically rooted bond with the nation and the tireless efforts of individuals like Louis Rosenstiel who sought to preserve its unique character. By adhering to specific classifications and embracing the use of local grains, bourbon whiskey has evolved from a questionable concoction to a refined and sought-after beverage, sealing its place as an icon of American heritage. The complex taste of bourbon whiskey we relish today is a symbol of its long-standing connection with American culture, a true American native spirit, if you will. Bourbon, although a type of whiskey, has a distinct character that comes with a specific set of criteria that must be met. It has to be distilled in the United States, contain a minimum of 51% corn, and age in new oak barrels. These conditions were not established by chance. Louis Rosenstiel, the head of a prominent American liquor company, dedicated immense resources to ensure bourbon received a special classification. He envisioned this recognition as a means to bolster its appeal and solidify it as an unmistakably American product, both at home and abroad. Rosenstiel's relentless lobbying, which included sending every U.S. embassy a case of bourbon, ultimately proved successful. In 1964, the classification rules were made into law, setting the stage for bourbon's rise to international renown. However, the rich relationship between bourbon and American drinkers predates these classification efforts. Whiskey made its North American debut in the 17th century, where it served as a questionable yet necessary fuel for frontier soldiers fighting Native Americans. Despite its unsavory character, the discovery of new corn and grain varieties in the Western Territories greatly improved the flavor of whiskey. Through the refining process and incorporation of regionally specific ingredients, what began as a rough spirit slowly transformed into the iconic bourbon whiskey cherished today. The hidden whiskey truth. Contrary to popular belief, the bourbon whiskey industry isn't dominated by small, family-run businesses with time-honored traditions. Its roots trace back to the 18th century when George Washington unsuccessfully attempted to tax the spirit, favoring larger manufacturers in the process. In the present day, 75% of whiskeys and bourbons on store shelves actually come from just 4 major companies: Beam, Schenley, Stitzel-Weller, and Heaven Hill. These powerhouses cleverly market their products under various brand names, giving the illusion of a diverse and artisanal market. In reality, it's a fiercely competitive landscape that capitalizes on consumer nostalgia for simpler times and the American frontier spirit. Whiskey, America's freedom symbol. Captain George Thorpe pioneered whiskey distillation in America about 400 years ago, using corn mash in a Virginia swamp. The rough taste of the initial product couldn't compete with the readily available and more enjoyable Caribbean rum. Rum had a stronghold because of affordable British trade in the Americas, and it even became a currency for goods and British-backed credit. However, people started associating rum with the negative aspects of British rule. When the American Revolution cut off access to cheap rum and sugar imports, whiskey experienced a resurgence. Using locally sourced ingredients, whiskey not only gained popularity, but also became a symbol of national freedom. Even George Washington owned a whiskey distillery, producing over 11,000 gallons per year. Whiskey's troubled past. Following independence, the whiskey industry faced numerous challenges, such as the corrupt whiskey ring, where low-quality products were sold as superior. Some of President Grant's closest allies were involved, leading to damaged industry reputation. The 18th Amendment introduced prohibition, banning the production and sale of alcohol for 13 years. Bootlegged alcohol flourished, often with deadly consequences due to the government's attempts to deter consumption by adding poisonous chemicals to certain alcohol supplies. Although prohibition was repealed, its effects on whiskey are long-lasting. The whiskey world was unprepared for the series of disasters that struck after gaining independence. In the 1800s, the nefarious whiskey ring corrupted the industry by flooding the market with substandard whiskey, evading taxes, and marring its reputation. To make matters worse, the conspiracy reached the White House, implicating President Grant's secretary and friend. In the 20th century, prohibition was enacted, halting the production and sale of alcoholic beverages. Desperation resulted in a surge of inferior bootlegged booze being an acceptable substitute. The government's ill-advised attempt to prevent consumption by tainting alcohol supplies with toxins only escalated the situation. Poisoning skyrocketed, and even after prohibition's repeal, the whiskey industry's image took significant time to recover. Whiskey's post-prohibition evolution. The end of prohibition in 1933 brought a resurgence in the whiskey market, but the landscape had been forever altered. Many distilleries couldn't recover from the dry spell, and the market became dominated by the resource-rich Big Four. These corporate giants rebranded whiskey as a luxury drink, expanding into new recipes and production methods. Despite their temporary cooperation during World War II, the battle for whiskey industry dominance resumed with the war's end. Whiskey made a triumphant return when Prohibition's end came in 1933, yet many Americans were unaware of its lasting impact on the industry. Before the dry spell, distilleries of all sizes had thrived across the nation. However, over half were forced to shutter their doors after 13 years of legal restrictions on alcohol sales. Even those that attempted to resume operations faced numerous obstacles and frequently failed. In the post-prohibition world, only the Big Four distilleries, well-funded and well-equipped, managed to rise above the challenges. They wielded their considerable resources to stifle competition, buy out smaller rivals, and consolidate their control over the market. With the funds to launch expansive marketing campaigns, these industry leaders set out to repair whiskey's tarnished reputation. No longer associated with violence and corruption, whiskey transformed into a high-quality beverage suited for connoisseurs. The whiskey shortage that followed 1933's repeal spurred distilleries to pursue new varieties of spirits. Pioneers like Stitzel-Weller leveraged wheat in crafting lighter alternatives that required less aging, meeting the demands of eager consumers. Even the ever-rivalrous Big Four joined forces during World War II, collaborating on a program dubbed Cocktails for Hitler to produce industrial alcohol for wartime use. With the nation's entrance into the conflict, many distilleries redirected their output to support the military effort. However, this temporary truce would dissolve as soon as the war ended, and the battle among the Big Four for supremacy in the whiskey domain raged on. Bourbon's luxury rebrand. Initially considered a drink for blue-collar workers, bourbon faced stiff competition from vodka, the newcomer to the American spirits market in 1946. Capturing the interest of the baby boomer generation, vodka's appeal as an easier-to-drink alternative threatened bourbon's market share, even outselling the traditional American spirit in just 30 years. In response, the whiskey industry rebranded bourbon as a luxury drink, spearheaded by Kentucky's Maker's Mark Distillery. This shift successfully gained the attention of European consumers who perceived bourbon as a fancy import, driving up international sales and expanding bourbon's consumer base to include people from all walks of life.
From its humble beginnings as a raw, unrefined spirit, bourbon whiskey has come a long way to become a world-renowned and cherished American product. And as you've learned from Reid Mitenbuler's Bourbon Empire, this success did not come without its share of challenges, controversies, and strategic maneuvering. Now that you've explored the journey of bourbon through the lens of politics, distilling traditions, the rise of the Big Four, and the rebranding from a blue-collar drink to a symbol of luxury, you'll appreciate the complexities and enthralling history of this American classic. So, raise a glass and toast to bourbon's captivating past and promising future.